Accessing Archive, Video Summary, The Collapse and the Second Dark Age.
The chaos of the 21st century was not a surprise to anyone who was paying attention. The world got hotter, the food got shorter, and the population got larger. Petroleum became increasingly rare even as more invasive and destructive methods were utilized in its production. But the collapse of the oil economy did little to stop the tide of global climate change. Desperate nations carved into mountains to burn coal and shale, a bid to keep their infrastructure from grinding to a halt. The world was collapsing around humanity. The African savanna transformed into a lifeless desert as the Fertile Crescent was overcome by water and became a putrid swamp. The Amazon rainforest burned. Strange destructive new weather patterns formed. Despite massive restructuring projects, even the first world nations could not be saved by their ingenuity and their wealth. The ocean consumed the land and overtook great cities. London, New York, Beijing, Baghdad, to name but a few. Disease began to rage out of control. Superbugs became the norm, and as newer, more exotic antibiotics were created, they were increasingly unavailable to the majority of humanity. Crop blights added to the ever-increasing tide of desperation and famine. In spite of the chaos, or perhaps because of it, humanity began to take its first serious steps off-world. It was sold as a long-shot way to solve the material energy crises at home. After all, what was left but long shots? The United States, aided by practical experience maintaining a lunar base, joined the European Union to establish the first permanent scientific and exploration colony on Mars. Over decades, Mars was transformed into a hotter planet with a more stable carbon dioxide atmosphere, supporting genetically modified plant life. Some of the wealthiest individuals took up the chance to escape the increasingly dangerous confines of Earth and became the first private Martian colonists, while elderly plutocrats took advantage of the advances in rocketry to become permanent residents of higher orbit to extend their life using zero-gravity environments. Experiments with long manned space travel and advances in propulsion allowed for the colonization of scientific colonies as far as the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Attempts to mine water and minerals from asteroids were promising, but experimental and highly subsidized. Despite all the hope placed in the stars, the decay back home was insurmountable. Desperate nations waged war over aquifers and fresh water, not oil. In the late 21st century, mankind saw its first limited exchange of nuclear weapons between India and Pakistan, the end result of a simmering border war over Himalayan water reserves and coal deposits. Atomic fireballs consumed millions of lives. The loss of life was inconsequential, even welcome to most nations, but the plumes of fallout fell across Asia. Like starving dogs, the nations of the earth fell onto each other in a fit of slow-motion global cannibalism. The last vestiges of order began to degrade. Food shortages persisted in even the most developed nations. Global currencies collapsed along with less stable governments under the pressure, the remaining major powers clung desperately to their might, while even their own people starved in the streets. New alliances and consolidations arose, new names to cover up the rotting smell. Desperate scrambles to consolidate and exploit in order to maintain any quality of life. By the dawn of the 22nd century, the lion's share of the earth was ruled by petty warlords for the first time since the Roman Empire. The Mars colony was in crisis and rapidly attempting to become completely self-sufficient, with varying success. The outer world colonies were mothballed. The world was a collection of failed and failing nations. These were the princes of the junkyard, the kings of the trash heap. Something had to give. The last functioning powers, the fortified North American alliance, the increasingly refugee-laden European Union, Pan-Pacifica, the Russian Dominion, were in the grip of powerful mass movements. As desperation bred fanaticism, shadows of communism, fascism, and newer, more radical movements stalked through the sick and starving populations. Then there came the flag that united disparate movements from dozens of nations. It was called unity, and it was terrible in its coming.